get so caught up in the day-to-day, just keeping your head down and fighting to survive. We float by each other like ghosts every day, ignorant to the struggle, the fight with one another, complacent with the fact that our systems are broken, with the fact that the top 10 will always be first in line, the fact that we are killing our planet and allowing them to keep us divided. We must stand together and rise up. It's time we wake up, and that is a difficult truth.
Hey everyone, Carlos here from ADifficultTruth. Welcome to the ADifficultTruth podcast, broadcasting live from beautiful South Florida. Today, we usually start off the podcast with going over a couple of the headlines, but today, since we have such an important topic, we're just going to get right into it. I brought in a friend of mine who is very knowledgeable about this topic, and I think that his insight will be definitely important. His name is Mikey, so let me go ahead and bring him over here via Skype. Today's topic is mental health. Let me update that here. If you guys are watching on YouTube, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. Let me go ahead and bring up Mike over here. Okay. Hey, Mike, can you hear us?
Yeah, I hear you fine, Carlos. Everything good?
Yeah, hey, thank you so much for joining.
Oh, you're welcome. Just wanted to give a little bit of my credentials so people know. I am a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Florida. I work it with mental health adults and addicts. I've worked with everything from borderline, schizophrenic, schizoaffective, bipolar, a lot of bipolar, and addiction. As well, I have experience working in trauma with children. I've got years into the field, board certified as a clinician and as a clinical social worker. So I'm very well versed in the topic of mental health. It's what I do every day. I'm very passionate about it, and I'm very well versed when it comes to just diagnosis, the psychotic features of it, psychosis, medication, the treatment, and the overall process in South Florida as well as nationally. So just so that people know, I'm just not some random dude that read a lot of books. I've got my degrees. I have my license. I'm working in the field actively and have been for a few years. So just so that people are aware. So did you have any questions specifically you wanted to start off with, Carlos?
Yeah, man. First of all, thank you so much for joining. And also, on the topic of mental health, I mean, I think that not judging, but just like going over like the past events that's happened over these last couple of weeks, a lot of the topic of mental health has been coming up a lot, you know, especially with the tragedies that have been happening. I personally think that it is one aspect of what's been happening, but I want to get your insight on that and just how much of an impact does mental health have on our society? I mean, it just seems like it's everywhere.
Okay. Well, there's a few things to talk about with that. Let's start with just the impact. Hold on. You can hear me now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about the impact as a society. Let's start with just numbers. About 44 million. The average right now is 44 million Americans are considered disabled. Now, when I mean disabled, that also includes not just physical, because everyone thinks, oh, people who are paraplegic. That also includes mental health. Now, of the people who are on disability, vast majority of them are in mental health, far outnumbering physical disability. And those are only the people that have a mental illness, they've got a diagnosis, they have gone through the judicial system, and someone has said, okay, this person is too impaired, they cannot work a full-time job, and they cannot function without government assistance. So that's only talking like even 44 million Americans, which is about it's about 9%, about a little more like the 10% of all of America. And of that, maybe 10 million is actual physical disability. So you have to understand that. And those are the only people that have gone through the judicial system. Usually they have a case of arrest, because normally what happens is people,
Oh.
the way that government finds out that, hey, this guy might have a mental illness. Usually what happens, let's say they have schizophrenia and they're having an active psychosis. Sometimes, usually there's drugs associated. Where there's mental health, there's usually addiction. Fun fact: 80% of people who have mental illness smoke cigarettes, because cigarettes are known to reduce anxiety, which is a big problem, and help with calming and sleep, which are two of the biggest issues. Hold on a second. Hold.
And whenever you finish, you leave us and help with something?
I'm gonna be here for like an hour. I'm gonna talk now. I'm sorry, I can't do it right now.
Oh, wow.
Well, what is it, Dad?
Hang up the gutter.
You're gonna have to give me some time. Sorry about that. So you're talking about an issue with. Oh, what was I saying? I'm sorry, I was interrupted by family.
It's all good. So basically, we just
Oh, the impact, correct.
Yeah.
So when you have an impact that high, and these are the only numbers that we have that are registered. So there's another issue that you have to deal with. People normally have a psychotic episode, and usually there's some drugs involved. So let's say they're trespassing, and a police officer says, which I literally did an assessment on a patient 2 days ago that this happened. Hey, move along. He's actively psychotic. He's seeing things. He's hearing visions. He might be delusioned, thinking that, oh, you're trying to come into my brain, and I've heard some pretty crazy stories. Then they arrest them because he's not following orders. They put him in jail for a few days, and while they're in jail, they're like, okay, something's off, and then they send him to a psychologist for an assessment, and then all of a sudden they get diagnosed. Now, if these are the beginning of the symptoms, they're probably going to give them it could be full-blown schizophrenia, but because of the DSM-5, it has to have 6 months of active symptoms, and they only have 1 month. So it's like, all right, we'll just give him not schizoaffective. I can't remember what the other one is. A smaller diagnosis until they build up to schizophrenia. And then once they've done this long enough and they have a long enough history of 6 months to a year, then at that point they will decide, okay, we're going to now going to give a diagnosis, and that whole process. But then when you're talking about the impact, these are the only numbers that we have of people who have been diagnosed. That's not including people who are actively psychotic that never do anything that end up going in jail. Or they could just be at home and just being psychotic all the time, and their parents and family never call hospitals because they're afraid they're going to lose their kids, or they're afraid that when I mean kids, I'm talking about grown adults. Because the average age of mental health activation is 20s.
Wow.
The average, if you're 21, that is the average age that all of a sudden psychotic. It happens earlier. I had a patient that he was seeing, what was it? He was becoming paranoid delusional and seeing visions when he was 13. So it can go as young as teenagers, but you can't give a teenager schizophrenia. So you give him something else, like usually other schizophrenic something, because you can't diagnose that to under they're 18. Then all of a sudden they turn 18 years old and bam, schizophrenia. But the average age is 20. So most people are adults that this happened to. Young adults living with their parents, and parents don't know what to do.
Now,
So they may not call hospitals.
Now that seems to me like an issue with the system. I mean, why can't you diagnose someone who's like a teenager with schizophrenia? Like, is that something that should be changed, or is there anything that they can do about it?
There's something that's there's also something okay, when it comes to diagnosis, do you know what the DSM is?
Vaguely, it's like the
Here.
rules and guidelines. It's to my knowledge.
No, I'm literally holding my copy. It's a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. There's 5 editions by the American Psychological Association, APA. So what happened is in the 1960s, the Social Security Act drops, says, bam, we now have money, federal money for people with mental illness. And then a bunch of lawyers got it, and they're like, okay, well, how do we get this money? Well, let's what we're going to do. We're going to make we're going to give all of these disorders, and we're going to give them names and then give them billing codes. And that's how we'll be able to bill for it. So that's what worked. And that started in the 60s, and it has had 5 separate versions. The most recent came out, I was in grad school, so probably 2013, 2014. That's when it dropped. So what happens is what the DSM for about 50, 60 years is the standard for setting up a diagnosis. If they do not qualify for the symptoms, they cannot have the diagnosis. So according to the DSM-5, it says, I can even literally read you schizophrenia, but I know it off the top of my head. Must have active symptoms for over 6 months. Active symptoms are positive symptoms. I'm sorry. Positive symptoms are any symptoms that has to do with anything that has to do with visual, like your senses, taste, touch, feel, see, smell, and that your senses are perceiving something that is not real, or delusions, like the police are trying to get me is one of the most common ones, or my wife is cheating on me. That's another very common delusion, or someone is following me yet there's nobody there and they see shadows. Those are like the most common ones for 6 months. But then the DSM specifically says cannot be given to children under 18 years old. It specifies that you
Wow.
cannot give it to someone 18. And that's from the American Psychological Association. So the problem with it is there'll be a psychiatrist looking at a 15-year-old goes, this kid has schizophrenia, and we'll see it. But we legally cannot give them that diagnosis. That would be a billing code issue, and then the IRS would come after them, and it's a whole different ballgame. So because of the way that the DSM is written, certain things cannot be given. I had a patient, he had schizophrenia at 14, because it's not like they didn't have it, because that's the other thing about with mental illness. Mental illness, we don't know a lot, but we know two things for mental illness for sure. The vast majority of mental illness is genetic, and you were born with it.
What?
Now,
It's genetic?
it's genetic. Environment, like for example, it's very minute, and I've seen patients, and the number of patients I've worked with and read cases on, the number of people that gain mental illness through their environment is very minute. But we know this for a fact. If you have schizophrenia, guaranteed, your mother, your grandmother, your nephew, someone in your immediate family has something, bipolar, schizophrenic, they have some form of it. It's mostly genetic. One. The second problem is it cannot be tested. The only way to test for schizophrenia is to literally, if they're dead, get their brain and then analyze it and do a biopsy. That is the only way to see it. There's no blood test for it. I've even heard some research about looking into the chemical imbalances and see if there's measurements. I've asked one of a mutual friend of mine, Dr. Christian Camargo, about the research implications, and he's saying, and from a fellow colleague, he was informing me that in theory it could be possible, but the levels don't dictate psychosis. It could be a million things that happen. It could be mood, it could be stress, trauma.
Oof.
Most of it is genetic. That's the one thing that we know for a fact, that there's a genetic component that is a strong factor. Now, there is a smaller one. People always talk about nature versus nurture. The truth is, when it comes to the development of a human being, like I'll just ask you a question, Carlos.
hmm
At what point are we done developing? At what age?
Well, like developing, I mean, I'm talking about completely cognitively, like you're done. I would say about 25.
That's the brain, and that's pretty accurate. Yes, that's actually correct. Your brain is fully developed at 25. Now, if you look at any of the psychological research, for example, sexual development ends by 13 according to Freud. The cognitive development of the brain, when you are able to finally get into abstract things, stops at about 16, 17, 18 if you're going to Piaget. Most psychologists in the last 200 years cap the full. There's still further development in your brain, but when it comes to the development of your personality, the way you think, the way you perceive the world, pretty much you're done by 14, 15. Now there's Eric Erickson, who goes further into development until late adulthood. But when you're talking about the development of personality, because that's what you're talking about with mental illness,
Right.
like people are like, well, can it be triggered? Okay. Usually what happens, because I've seen cases of people that were born with Asperger's, they have Asperger's, but then they get PTSD. PTSD, you're not born with that. That is, PTSD is a veteran who goes out there, sees tons of horrifying murder and has panic attacks and anxiety. Depression, that there is some genetic components with depression. We know that for sure. But things like schizophrenia, bipolar, 1 and 2 personality disorders, those are genetic. So there is a smaller number. Some people can get depression, but if you even look at family history, if you have depression, if you struggle with depression, someone in your immediate family struggles with depression and also with anxiety. But there are some mental illness that are triggered through, environment. Those are things like PTSD, and there's even a whole category that's only called stress related. But
Wow.
those are very small. So really, the truth is nature versus nurture. They're really not much different. Because by the time you're a full-grown adult, 18, I'm talking about as an 18-year-old adult, quote unquote full grown in the viewpoint of an American citizen, you're pretty much done with most of your development. Your brain is developing, but from 18 to 25, the only part of your brain that's developing is your frontal lobe.
Right.
That's the part of your brain that isn't done developing, which control and what that does, since your brain is in further development, that means your brain is always actively moving, which is why 18 to 25-year-olds, that's considered prime human behavior. Since your brain is developing, your brain is moving, which means your body is moving, which is why naturally your metabolism is faster. You're able to memorize information because your brain is always active. After 25, you have to put in the effort in order to get the same amount of effort. To remember things as well, you have to trigger and be active in your memory. So you have to do things like that.
Yeah, and I totally agree. If you don't use it, you lose it. I mean, that's just
After 25, yes.
Yeah, and I mean,
21, you still have it.
that's absolutely fascinating. I think that what I found most interesting is that I think people have a misconception of how mental illness works. Most people think that it comes from an environment, someone snapped, and that's just what ends up happening. I don't know, they just had this string of events and then this person snapped. But that doesn't seem to be the case.
No,
It's
people aren't the Joker.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it can happen, and I guess there's situations where it does, but most of the time, as you're saying, it's genetic, and I would never expect that to be the case.
Like a good example, a mutual. I actually had a friend this happened when I was a kid growing up. Do you remember Joey? Did you ever meet Joey?
Yes, I remember
Okay.
him.
Now Joey, now looking back as a clinician, a lot of things make sense, but he was always a little bit OCD. He definitely wasn't OCD because I know OCD diagnosis. He wasn't OCD when he was 14, 15. Because a lot of people, fun fact, here's a little side note. If you are one of those people who you need everything in order, like you have to have your room set up and you're like, "Oh, I'm a little OCD." Most people, it's not that they have an obsessive thought. It's that's their way of they have a struggle with anxiety and that's their way of coping with their anxiety. That's usually how people who are quote unquote OCD are. But they're not actually OCD. They don't have an obsessive thought that they need to do something or else they're going to go crazy. And actually it's driving them crazy even if they do it. And they do it like 20 times a day. That's kind of their way of coping. So that's kind of what it seemed like as a kid. And 14, 15, 16, we grew up and he was always a nice guy, but he was always a little bit like, things had to be in order. He would take extra long to do certain things, like when it came to cleaning, like he would wash his hands. Then fast forward, he goes to college, 19, 20 years old. He actually legitimately has OCD. He had an obsessive thought. He wanted to become a surgeon. And his obsessive thought was, okay, I have to be sterile because he wanted to be a surgeon.
Right.
So all of a sudden, he was washing his hands a minimal of 4 hours a day, up to his elbows, standing, literally would not be leaving the surgical room for 4 hours, washing his hands, so much so that he was cutting his hands, bleeding everywhere because he was washing his actual skin off, taking 8 to 9 hour showers every day. So he was spending 12 hours just cleaning and bleeding all the time. That's legit OCD because he's having an obsessive thought and he's compulsively doing something, which for him was hand washing, in order to get rid of it. It wasn't about the germs; it was about being sterile. But he was obsessed with it, and it caused a cycle where he would lost friendships. he had to drop out of school because obviously you're doing 12 hours a day of watching. You're not studying. You're not going to class.
Yeah, that just, I guess, snowballs into something worse. But this started. You're saying this started way before.
You could see, looking back as a clinician, you could see there were signs. But then one day in his 20s, bam, something happened, which is, as I said, the average age of onset for mental illness. Because it's not like they were perfectly normal their whole lives. They were just normal people, and then one day, 20, bam, all of a sudden they're nuts. No. Usually they were a little off their whole childhood. They were always a little off, but they were functional. And if you look even in the DSM, almost every single disorder has the same symptom, and it causes great distress. So when he was 14, he was still OCD, but it didn't cause distress. He was able to cope, he was able to go to school, he was able to have friendships, he was able to date. But then in his 20s, which is the average age of activation of mental illness, because it's not that they got it all of a sudden, like it's not like he caught OCD like you catch a cold.
Right.
No, he always had it. He always had it, and you can see it. But because he was able to function, no one thought any of it. And then 20 years old happens, and all of a sudden, it causes great distress because the obsessions go beyond what he can cope, and his compulsions are not stopping the obsessions, and it's causing so much, and it's obviously causing distress because you have to drop out of school, you're losing friends, it's straining your relationships. He was becoming violently angry. Because usually with OCD, they either become angry or suicidal depression.
Wow. I mean, and again, that just seems like a failure on the system's part that you cannot diagnose and get these people help before the snap.
And the problem is the thing is, it's not necessarily a failure. It's more than just that. Because there has to be a line. Because if that's the case, you could diagnose 13-year-olds who may not have OCD. They could, because up until he had it, but you don't know they have it until they have the symptoms, until it becomes a distress. Because if you give someone that diagnosis, once you give it, it can't be taken away. So you have to have it with a grain of salt. That's why it's so difficult to get a diagnosis. Because the reality is once you give schizophrenia, you're schizophrenic forever. Once you have OCD, you're OCD forever. It's not like you can take it away. There is no eraser. You can change the diagnosis, but once they have something, they have it for life.
Right.
And that follows you. So there has to be a line. So if you say at 18 years old, like, it's not a failure of the system. What it is it's the reality is at some point you got to draw a line, like, okay, this is when we have to start thinking about these symptoms before it gets to here. And 18 is not half bad when, and mind you, you're talking about one thing for schizophrenia. That's one example. It's not like this is a problem like for everything. But with the mental health world, it's a combination of, it's not that people aren't getting diagnosed. Because when you're talking about mental illness, the problem isn't that we're not getting enough diagnosis, or the problem isn't that even that we don't have enough resources. We have enough. There's actually a problem people don't even know about unless you work in mental health. Would you like to know what the problem is that America has specifically on mental health? And guess what? It's not that there's not enough medications. It's not that not even that there's not enough resources. There's more than enough resources. Would you like to know the real problem?
I'll take a crack at it. Is it too much?
No. The real problem is simple. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Here's the problem. Remember I told you it's a mainly genetic problem, a genetic focus, correct?
Right.
And that means someone in their immediate family, mom, father, brothers. So let's say this. Okay, I am diagnosed schizophrenia. Okay, I got this crap now. All right, not speaking that over myself, but just as an example. So this guy X has schizophrenia, and he is on SSR. He's on disability. He has an S, and he's on SSRI, and he gets about $750 from the government every month. Okay. Now let's say he's so impaired, because I have clients like this. I have a patient. Well, actually, I had a patient recently. He was so impaired, we could not get him to stop going to the hospital every month, and that was with having a targeted case manager, me, his therapist, another LCSW working with him, a supervisor with the JDP and PSR, as well as working in conjunction with his psychiatrist, a team of 5 professionals in the building actively working together could not get this guy any better. He is that impaired.
Wow.
And when you deal with someone like that, that's when you have to get state hospitalization. But when you have someone that impaired, and let's say we're not going state hospitalization, so he can't be his own payee. He cannot pay his own bills. He can't do it. You cannot trust him with his own, so he needs someone called a payee. Now, a payee says that this individual X is not capable of taking care of his finances and his government stipends that he used to survive, because he will use it on stupid things like buying Winn-Dix or going to Winn-Dixie and blowing it off, or drugs. Like, that's it. They'll blow it off. And it's not that they're evil people. They're just impaired. They don't understand the importance of paying rent. So
Right.
so then the individual has to pick their payee, because the government can't say, okay, this person's going to be your payee. No, it's your money. So then so let's be honest, Carlos, if you or me had to pick someone to take care of our finances, who would you probably pick?
Wow. Okay, I see where this is going. Obviously, you would go for a family member. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, that would be your
Exactly.
first prerogative or priority.
Yes.
Oh yeah,
family member or a partner. And guess what? Most of the time, they have something themselves. And so what
Wow.
you have is impaired people taking care of other impaired people. And with this patient, for example, something as simple as, we don't know if this guy, I had another patient who may or may not have had HIV. We don't know. And here's the problem. He was having unprotected sex with his girlfriend, who was pregnant with his child, and then all of a sudden they broke up, and the mother who he was staying with found HIV medication. And she says, oh, what the hell is this under her name? It's like, she has HIV.
Whoa.
And they had unprotected sex sometimes. So he's like, but he's so impaired. He's like, no, I can't have HIV. I don't have any symptoms. And I'm telling you, I'm psychoeducating for 2 months. I'm like, buddy, if symptoms arise, that's because it becomes AIDS and you're going to die. That's what happens. And
Yeah.
of course, I'm educating, like, make sure you use condoms, because I know he's going to be sexually active. Like, look, wrap it up like a Christmas present. I'm very funny like that. Like, dude, wrap that junk up like a Christmas present, okay? A bow and everything. Make sure it's tight for your safety, and more important, the safety of someone else. But the reality is he doesn't understand that, because he's in his mind, I'm not having symptoms, that means I don't have it, right? And I'm like, no, you don't have symptoms. And just as simple, so guess what? We have to get him. There's multiple free facilities. I'm going to say this for the channel because it's good information to have. There's a facility that you can go anywhere in Miami, it's downtown. It's called, I can't remember the name.
Is it
But if
Test
you Google,
Miami?
it's another one that's completely free. They will do the test and give you the results the same day. You can walk in completely free HIV testing, and they'll even help you get medications for free if you have issues. I have to remember it. I might have to.
That sounds
Send it-
really, really good. If you remember the name, I'll
text
look it
to
up.
you and-
Yeah, and I'll put it
Hold
in the description of the YouTube video, so that way people can
Right now, I'm actually
look
on a
it up.
call.
Especially since we live in South Florida.
I might have to take a break because my family's doing something. You might have to pause for a few minutes. Might have to help my family.
No
But I
problem.
can
We
speak
can.
for a few minutes.
Yeah, we can take a couple minute break and then we'll be back.
Okay, but let me just finish the topic that we're talking about. So
Yeah.
he has HIV. He may or may not have it. So what do you do when you have someone that needs resources? There's someone called a targeted case manager. Their job is to make sure that the patient receives the resources they need. But the problem is this patient wasn't answering phone calls. And it
Ooh.
happens a lot. Something as simple as they have a cell phone. Hey, my case manager is calling. They're going to help make sure that I get whatever, whether it's a bus pass, financial support, Section 8, whatever the resources you need. All they got to do is answer the phone and be like, hello, yes, I'll be at that meeting. But you're talking about people, some people, because there's some people who are just that impaired. And so they're like, okay, they don't answer the phone, or they say they'll do it and they won't do anything. And so they call the family. And guess what? The family is usually impaired themselves. It's not like people imagine like mental illness is, there's a completely normal family and they had a normal kid. And then one day the house exploded, like it's a Batman story. Like the house exploded and now this kid wants to murder people. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
Usually the family is impaired, has some form of mental illness. If not in the direct family, an uncle, a sibling, someone has something, and they were raised in a home with a mentally ill person that is not able to cope. The family may not even know that they're mentally ill until it goes to the point where they're going in jail, and they end up, oh, oops, that's why a lot of patients I have are from JDP, jail diversion program, what it stands for, because a lot of guys end up in jail because I've had patients attack cops because they thought the cops were trying to rape them.
Yeah, I mean, let's take the case of, I mean, eventually, unfortunately, the story was not a happy ending. There was a YouTuber named Etika, and the guy, one of his final live streams was him having a episode, thinking that the cops were coming to get him, and he was barricaded inside his home, and he swore that the cops were people were calling the cops on him, and obviously the cops had to be called, and he had to be taken out of there. And then once he was released, which I have no idea why they would release with him and not get him the care that he needed, he ended
that's
up
another topic.
yeah, he ended up
I'll get into
unfortunately offing himself.
committing suicide. It's very
Yeah, and it's just sad that it's exactly as you described, and he was in his 20s. The guy had a breakdown, and no one was paying attention, and then finally we had an episode. I suspect that there was multiple episodes where the cops were involved. He was in multiple.
There's usually a history.
Yeah,
There's
multiple.
usually a history. He probably knew the guy. Like, come on, Ted, let's go.
Yeah, and multiple times he was in an institution, and yet, he just obviously didn't get the help he needed because he either, as you said, he must have been in a home where obviously these things were present.
Yeah, and then they've been there. And sometimes there's a few things to talk about that. Humans can adapt to anything as long as it's consistent. Even psychosis. You can be like, oh, that's just Uncle Bob. He's over there. He's always seeing spirits.
Mm-hmm.
And you can adjust to anything. You can become numb to anything. That's one issue on the part of the family. There's about two other issues. Here, I'll speak about. I had a patient Thursday. She has been hospitalized 28 times in 3 months. Let me repeat that. 28 times in 3 months. That means
wow.
In 1 month, she had to be in the hospital 9 times. And that means she was hospitalized, stayed there 2 or 3 days, 2 days later came back and did that 9 times, 1 month, and another month, 10 months before she was stayed hospitalized. And in group, we were talking about state hospitalization because someone, it wasn't my patient, but because we were in a group setting, another person's patient, she was actively psychotic, and we said, hey, why don't you go because the problem is she was not in qualification for a Baker Act. So we're like, hey, look, when you deal with a patient, then you're like, I'm pretty sure this person's going to do something stupid, but we don't have the qualifications to Baker Act, okay, and force them to hospitalization. We were talking like, hey, look, can you volunteer? And she did, and it did wonders for her. And this patient was saying that she kept being hospitalized over and over and over again, but she needed to stay in a hospital for a long period of time. And that brings up another major issue is a lot of people don't get the care when they're hospitalized because their insurance runs out. They get 2 or 3 days and there you go, you're out. Whether you're better or not, you get out.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened in that other case that I was talking about.
With that case, it sounds like the patient I was telling you about, the one that possibly had HIV, we had to go with the route of state hospitalization because there are some people, when they are that impaired, they have to be state hospitalized. They have to live in a hospital for a month, 2 months, stabilized with no drugs. Some people need that. And the patient I was telling you who was sharing with the group that she was hospitalized 28 times in 3 months, she's completely stable now. She's doing great. She's stable. But she was telling the group that she needed to be in the hospital for a couple months. And even one of the other patients was saying that she's scared that they're going to be state hospitalized and she's going to stay there forever. Like, no. And we had to educate, like, no, you'll be there a couple months at most. It's just to get you the help you need.
Yeah.
And that's state hospitalization is also extremely hard to get in. It's very difficult. Just to start off with the patient I just had to do in the process, which this is the first time I've ever had to do it in years of doing this. I've never had to do it. This is the first time ever where I've had someone this impaired. You have to call their insurance, and they have to bring a specialized case manager. that all they do is assess whether or not they need hospitalization, and then they have to go in that process. But that sounds like a case that whoever was working his case did not look into the possibility maybe this guy's too impaired to be at home. Maybe he needs more than our services, and we need to refer him and see if we can get maybe a Marchman Act to the family where they take away his rights, where the family has to make the choices, or have to advocate for state hospitalization, or just, and that could be, and I'm not going to speak on his team because I don't know his team, and I understand the difficulties of losing patients. When you work in this field, patients die.
Yeah.
It's a reality. Patients die. I had a patient die. My first patient die. He was completely successfully discharged. He was part of the addiction program. He bipolar, doing great. I mean, he was working a job. He was he was reconnecting with his son. He was having a healthy relationship. He was doing fantastic. So I gave him a discharge, healthy discharge. He was doing great. I get a call 7 months later from one of my colleagues saying they found him dead in the apartment because he went back to drugs. He had all the referral sources. He did not use the resources ahead of him, and he died in his apartment. And his son is probably 10 or 11 now, and is not going to grow up without his dad.
Yeah, and that's a sad reality. And is it really an issue that you have to jump through hoops to try to sometimes get these people the help they need?
Well, you see, that's you're asking an interesting question.
Uh-oh. Sorry guys, I think we lost Mike here. Hold on, let me get him back on. Okay, there we go.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. It's an interesting question that you're asking because the reality is this. Okay, one of the two greatest part of being a human is the ability to think and the ability to choose. And when it comes to state hospitalization, you're taking away their ability. You're taking away a person's ability to choose where to stay, where to sleep, how to be treated, and it's scary. It's scary because you don't when they go through the process. Okay, you need to be state hospitalized. You just told them you can't pick how to eat. You don't pick where you sleep. You have to stay here. You have to take this medication. You have to, and that's scary.
Yeah.
And the reality is for me, it's really dangerous to say, oh, well, we just need to make it easier. I'm like, well, that is, then you're making it easier for people who don't need to be state hospitalized to be state hospitalized. So it's a really difficult balance because you have to be very careful when you take away people's right to choose, because that's what you're doing. You're saying they're impaired, so impaired that they can't take care of themselves. And there are people like that.
Right,
And
but
it's not like they're going to always be that way. They'll need to get better. It's a difficult thing to just say that we just need to make it easier. I'm like, you got to be careful because there's that you got to be really careful. And that's why you need a good team
yeah,
to
and
work with them.
yeah, agreed. And it's just like, it just comes from the thought process of like, wait a minute, these people had to jump through hoops. Insurance may or may not cover it. And now they end up in this situation.
That's why people like me exist, to make sure that they go through. That's why you have a therapist to help you, the individual, to process and to get the insight so you understand what you have available to you. Why you have a case manager making sure you get your resources. Why you have an advocate who's going out into Washington D.C. or in the Tallahassee to advocate for more rights. That's why we do what we do, and there are plenty of resources. And the funny thing is a lot of guys, there's a lot of resources available, and they usually end up finding their way out. It's just sad that a lot of times, a lot of guys find out research. I had a patient recently, like about a couple weeks ago, who was telling me that, oh, he was happy he got arrested, because if he didn't get arrested, he didn't know he was bipolar. He didn't know that he needed lithium. He didn't know any of that stuff. And he's like, dude, I'm so happy because now he's stable.
Yeah.
And it's sad that sometimes that's what it takes.
Yeah, and here's another question. Can another problem be that we just have this negative stigma about being institutionalized, this negative stigma of I need help, this whole like, oh man, he's going to see a therapist, man. Is there something wrong with
Mm,
him? Um, is that another like issue? Because I feel like society is just kind of
mm.
taught or ingrained to, you know, you're gonna be fine. Just do what you gotta do. And to negatively look upon a person who's like, oh man, he's got to go to an institution. Oh, do you hear
Mhm.
about Johnny? That guy is now he's been in like the loony bin in the past like months, bro. Yeah, yeah, and it just kind of gives this negative tone to all this, and I think it really doesn't need to be that way.
Well, there's a problem. The truth is, people are very arrogant to think that they don't have problems.
Yeah,
Because when you're saying, "Oh, he has problems," so you don't, you have everything figured out. You live paycheck. No, I have problems too. Then what's the problem with looking for help? I have a saying: help is the hardest word for a human to say. People don't like to be vulnerable. Vulnerability, is, to me, the way I define it, is the ability to receive help. It's people, humans. Just I don't care. Cross culturally, humans do not like to be vulnerable. It's difficult to go to a stranger because when you're going to a therapist, you're going to a stranger, pour out your heart and trust that he's going to treat you properly when everyone else in your life hasn't, which
yeah,
is
that's
very common.
scary. That's scary to most people, I would say.
It is, and I've been on both sides of the table. I've had to do therapy, and I've had to receive it. I've had difficult times in my life, and I know what it's like to be on both sides of the table. I know what it's like to sit there and be the person that's trusting, and I know what it's like to sit on the other side where I have my personal problem, and I got to talk to my therapist, and be like, "Oh my gosh, dude," because sometimes this stuff is hard, and I don't want to be burned out, so I could provide the best amount of care for my patients.
You
You,
see, and that's how it should be perceived. It should be as perceived as just going to the doctor for your regular checkup. If you need this, and obviously, the what is it? I guess stereotype is to go see your doctor at least once a year. I
mhm,
mean, nobody bats an eye when you go to see a doctor about I don't know, your flu
checkup.
symptoms. Yeah, but why is it such a problem, and what can we do to change that image in society to be like, it's okay to ask for help?
Well, I think also we need to change the perceptive of strength. This is gonna sound funny, but I'm getting to a point.
Okay.
When people, let's go to Marvel. We're both big
Oh
superhero
yeah,
comic nerds.
absolutely.
Okay, let's go to Thor. When people say what was the strongest Thor and we're talking the MCU movies, people would probably say like Wakanda Thor, right? When he came in, like, where Thanos, where are you? And he's
Yeah,
got his.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
I say the strongest Thor is Fat Thor. Now nobody likes that because he was still worthy when he was fat and depressed because he was battling with 5 years of depression
Hmm.
and grief and unresolved grief, and he was broken. And his mother was like almost the therapist. Really, I've quoted some of the stuff she said to patients,
Yeah.
and they're just because he said, "Oh," and I love saying this because it's so true. He says, "I was supposed to be better." He says, "We all fail. We're supposed to be. All we can do is be who we are." And it's true. We fail because we as humans, we have this construct in our mind of who we are, the apex reality of this is who I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be. Let's say that you grew up and you had people like you have a good voice and you're 8-year-old. I'm supposed to be the next Mariah Carey, but then reality hits. You're not her. You
Yep.
tried your best, and the most you could do is sing at some cafe bars, and that person might get depressed and anxious and come in my office, and be like, "I was supposed to be this." I'm like, we all fail who we're supposed to be. All we can do is accept who we are and find happiness, because you cannot find happiness in this life until you accept who and what you are. If you constantly live in denial, you'll never get past anything. And the reality is people want to always be even Christy Alley has a brilliant 1 hour stand-up special called Man on Fire on Netflix,
Hmm.
where he talks about everybody wants to be the main antagonist, everybody wants to be Denzel Washington in the movie, and everyone thinks they are, but the reality is that's not most people. That's not even the people who think they are Denzel in the movie, they're not even Denzel. We're not the main authors of our own story, because if we were, we'd have complete control over weather, finances, uh, every natural event that occurs. Life happens, probability exists, and all we can do is adapt to our environment. But people don't like that. As a whole in a society, especially in America, we all want to think that if we were Thor, we want to be Thor in Wakanda. No, but the truth is the real strength doesn't come from a lack of adversity or even an overcome. It's an overcoming of adversity. Fat Thor going up, being all gross and depressed and deciding, even though he looks like a brosif and no one's taking him seriously, that he's gonna go get the time stone, face his ex who destroyed him because he's obviously brokenhearted about that, and go see his mother, facing the reality and showing his mom that this is who I am. I turned into a fat loser, and she still loves and accepts him, and through that acceptance was able to accept that this is who he is today, and he was still worthy.
And
Not because.
yeah, and that brings me up to like the whole point in society. It's like, you know what we did with that? We memed it. We memed it.
Yeah, that's how we cope. Humor. Why do you think everyone loves Deadpool? Because that humor is a healthy coping mechanism. It's a good coping mechanism. People, instead of face the reality of, wow, if someone this strong can look like that and give up and still be found worthy, but I can't do that. Because the reality is when you face something like that, you have a choice to make. Either accept to be like, wow, I'm not that guy, or ignore it, assuming that that is not you.
Right.
And if you choose to ignore it, and you're not accepting that, you have to cope with it.
Right.
And one of the most common forms is humor. That's what Deadpool does. That's why everyone loves Deadpool, because he just makes fun of everything. So we meme it because it causes too much anxiety. Because if it's true that you could be a fat loser and recreate yourself into something better, and I'm not doing it, that means I could be better, but I can't do it. Most people don't want to be better. They just want to feel better about what they do. They just want someone to say that it's okay to be a fat loser and be 33. It's okay to have no goals and ambition. It's okay to be lazy. No, that's not okay.
Yeah,
It's not
exactly.
okay.
Exactly. And that's like, it's something that I feel like society has just kind of ingrained in us, whether we like it or not. It's even from children, even from birth. You know, I feel like society and how we perceive things have just kind of skewed us, and here we are.
Well, it's fun fact. We talk a lot about society, but fun fact. Do you know what 80% of a child? Do you know where 80% of a child's psychological development and education comes from?
Well, a child, it has to be from the home.
Correct answer. Most people would say the schools. Or because remember, when you're talking about larger society, there's two types of things. I can't remember which theorist said this, but there's nurture, which is immediate, and then there's sustained environment. Sustained environment, nurture environment is where you're home, that's where you're raised, that's where most of your development happens. And the sustained environment is the outside. The truth is when you're talking about the development of stigmas, this is the way that you perceive reality, the way that your beliefs, your moralistic viewpoints, your personality, the vast majority of those developments do not happen through the sustained environment. It's through the nurture. So the reality is, if you want to ask why people believe that, when you're saying, why do people think this way? It's not actually because of outside environment putting in. It's not television. It's more than TV. Unless they're watching TV 28 hours a day or that feeding into their brains, it's the human interaction, the day-to-day interactions with the way that they're raised with immediate family and whoever their caregivers are that are educating. And if you look at the way people educate children, they educate them with a false sense of reality. You can be whatever you want.
Yeah,
That's why I
yeah.
love Christy Alley's Man on Fire. He jokes about that. That no, you can't do whatever you want. And he has this whole sketch. Really? You can just do whatever you want, you believe in it? Shit through your eyes. Right now.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's joking about it. Really? No matter how hard you can believe with all your heart, it's always gonna come out your butt. Now you have a high dry cleaning bill because you're trying to shit through your eyes. And
Ye-
he's making fun of it, but he's 100% right. The way we train children because we're so afraid of quote unquote damaging them. But the reality is you people, in order for humans to develop in anything, just like muscles, like I work out because I want to be strong. Resistance causes strength, and where there is strength, there is growth. And in order to grow, there must be resistance. But when you train children, the not saying that not saying to not that don't throw safety out the window. Obviously, you're not going to be like, hey, let's put him with a hungry Rottweiler, see what happens. That
Yeah, I mean,
has
common
a
sense.
history.
Yeah, common
Common
sense
sense isn't so
dictates.
common, but within the realms of safety. But let them fall, let them ride the bike, and if they fell, let them get up. They're not dead, they're not dying. You're right there. Let them get up. Let them learn.
Yeah,
But we
yeah.
as this American society, and mind you, when you're talking the viewpoint, you're talking in an American. These viewpoints isn't happening in third world countries like Cuba, Venezuela, even second world countries are more lesser developed because they have to. They have to resist more because guess what? They have to walk to get food. They have to walk to get water. This is the perspective of someone with the ability that they have every single piece of water in the home of a Floridian home is drinkable and you will not get sick. You have food accessible and cheap. You can get food in dumpsters that are probably better than the food they give out in other countries.
Yeah, and that's why I'm trying to understand it, because obviously you and I are very, very, very lucky and very privileged, and I feel like you obviously understand it better than I do, but I just want to get a feel for like why the why of this whole thing, you know?
It's exactly what I said, because in America, this is an American viewpoint. We don't have resistance is optional. Put it this way: in America, you have to go to a gym to get fit, to not get fat, not even get fit, to not get fat. That's not an option in most countries. You
Yeah.
don't need a gym. You just have to go. Oh, we need to eat today. Go hunt it. Oh, we need to go find water. You got to walk 2 miles to get the only clean water. You're going to be, there's no fat people in those countries. It doesn't exist because we have to look for resistance. We have to make a cognitive choice and say, like, I want to be stronger. I want to develop as a person. Therefore, I will work harder. We have to
Right.
make that choice because food and water is accessible. Basic needs: food, water, even care. Entertainment. You want to go entertain yourself? Pick anything. There's some places, or even like in 17th, it's not like it's 17th century Italy where you want to be entertainment. Well, you better walk over to Vienna and take your horse to Vienna to go watch the opera that's being played only 3 or 4 times a year, and that's the only show that you get. We have instant access to entertainment, food, water, even even if you're homeless, there are shelters, although they are very dangerous. Don't get me wrong, but the point is, we have resistance is a choice. That means strength and growth is a choice, and a lot of Americans are comfortable in their complacency.
Well, I think you
Therefore, they
just hit
don't
the
want.
nail. I think you just hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
Complacency, comfort.
Yes.
Why would you want to
It's
leave that?
most people would say you're crazy. Why should I do that? But most people look at their lives as if they're Denzel Washington. Except in this movie, Denzel Washington, it's strong to go to work, have a terrible job, making about 35 to 40 a year, having kids, living check by paycheck, and doing nothing and never going anywhere. Most people, that's what they live. And this is, mind you, this is an American viewpoint because this is not true in a vast majority of the world. There's only 320 million people. There's about 4 billion people that don't have that. No, actually, it's less than 25% of the world. So 25% of 7 billion people is like about 2 billion. So about like 1 to 2 billion people don't have that luxury, and we're lucky. But the way I perceive it, and the thing that should be used is, if you're an American citizen, you're in the top 1% of the world. That's just a reality. You are in the world, and that's not a bad thing. Doesn't make you a horrible person. But if you have the best opportunity, it is your responsibility to use it to better the world, because with responsibility gives purpose. If you have a responsibility, something that you need to do, something that if you don't do, someone is lacking, it gives your life meaning and purpose. But if you don't have that, you're just wasting. You have no life. You're just wasting away on a couch watching TV. It doesn't matter if it's Game of Thrones or whatever amazing television. Not to say that watching television is bad. Well,
No,
in gratuitous amounts, it is.
no, but I think that's the problem right there. I mean, I'm talking about most people. It's like, why would you want to leave that comfort? I think we
And
were,
most people don't.
yeah, and I think obviously we have a different understanding, and more so than I do, but I completely agree with you. It's like we understand that we live in comfort. We understand that this is not normal in any other part of the world, and because we're so self-aware, it's just like obviously we take it upon ourselves to give ourselves challenges.
As we should, and a lot of people do. Some people are go too much and work like make tons of millions of dollars a day, work 80+ hours a week, and never see their families. And those are the people that are running the country. It's like, all right, fine, have no life, okay. And it's a balance of having purpose and moving forward while having compassion on yourself by not expecting too much.
Yeah, everything is balance. I think
Yeah,
everything.
like Fat Thor, he felt guilty for what happened, and he had to accept his mistakes and move past it. That's why he's like, okay, this is who I am. I'm gonna go on a new adventure and rediscover myself. It's like, okay, we have those moments, and he knew he had a responsibility, so he gave responsibility to someone who was better suited, which was Valkyrie in that scene. But the reality is when you're dealing with people, an American perspective, comfort, if you really think about it, all humans work toward is comfort. We withhold what we want today so we can enjoy it tomorrow. But at some point, you need to enjoy it. And that's a part of life. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But while you're working toward comfort, you also have a responsibility, whether you're a parent, and being a parent is very admirable, being a parent raising your children, but you raise those damn kids to the best of your ability, providing the best education and giving them the healthiest environment possible that you is within your reason and your within knowledge while continuing to grow as an individual and adjusting your parenting style for the needs of the child. The simple reality is the parents, I say this and people don't like it, but parents are just getting shittier. They just are getting shittier parents.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could see it in the newer generations.
Oh, and I'm not saying that as in like these kids today with their fancy. I'm saying that specifically as I was a teacher before as well. And I've asked every teacher I've ever seen, and I've always heard the same thing. They're getting dumber. The kids are literally getting less educated. And even facts, people, I'm sure, I don't know if anyone's ever, you've seen the movie Idiocracy, of course, correct?
Yeah, that's literally what came through my head.
Now the premise is that, okay, more dumb people are going to have more babies, and then eventually everyone's going to get dumb. Now, it's a funny movie, but actually, I read the University of Harvard did a long-term study about 40, 50, 60 years about in America, and to see, this was in the American population, to see whether or not people that were less intelligent had more children. Actually, that was not true up until the 90s. Then it started to switch a little bit. So for the last 20 years, people who are less intelligent have been having more kids. But that wasn't true from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, up until the last 20 years. That is becoming the shift. It actually is happening. There are people that are less educated are having more children than people who are more educated. And it's occurring, and that has to do a lot with, inflation, the cost of living, kids, daycare. I mean, if you want to have a daycare in Florida for 2 or 3 kids, it's about $1,500 to $2,000 a month.
Absolutely.
And if it's say $1,500, and if you make 40 a year, 1,500 times 12, that's $12,500. It's about $18,000. And that's not including your mortgage payment. That's not including your food, your rent, nothing.
No, you can't do it. It's not financially feasible.
No, and so a lot of people have difficulties. And guess what? And in today's day and age, that means 40 years is not enough and that's between one man. So that means the woman has to work too, probably full time, in order to pay for daycare.
Yep.
So the reality is, and so people who are more educated are just having less kids because more educated just means a college degree. It's not like we're not talking about like Harvard League, master's license professionals. We're talking about just people that went to college and got a degree. That's considered more educated.
Yeah.
Their mean is about 35 to 40.
Yep.
And I mean, if you want 2 kids, that's in Florida about $1,500, maybe $2,000. You're talking a minimum of $18,000 to $24,000, average of $20,000. That's half of your paycheck. You're not including a mortgage payment, food, insurance, nothing.
Right. You need 2 full-time. You need 2 full-time jobs.
Yeah. And guess what? And that's a man's salary. Women are slightly less. So you're not even talking an equal 40,000. Talking maybe 35. And that's 80 hours from the two of them away from their. That's 40 hours between both parents where they're away from their children. And that's where a lot of kids are being raised. So and you're having strangers raise your kids, and a lot of people just throw screens in front of kids. They're being raised by screens.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a very different generation in America, and it's causing a lot of damage. I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, technology is bad. I love technology, and technology is a tool. How you use it is what differentiates people.
Absolutely, and I completely agree with you. My sister is a teacher, and she says
Oh,
this.
Lily,
Yeah.
Ellie became a teacher.
Yep. And she's
Oh,
literally
good
on
for
the
her.
same page. She's
I'm
literally
so
on the same
sorry for her.
page. I trust she understands, and it's like, yeah, I mean, these kids, I don't know what to do with them. Like,
No,
I literally, she has to. It's worse than pulling teeth. And then she's like, I just don't know. It must be the parents. And it's like, how is it that these kids can play Fortnite for 10 hours a day, but they can't solve like a simple problem?
you know why?
Mm.
Because I'll tell you something. The amount of stimulus that, like, for example, television. When we grew up, we're 29. When we
Yep.
grew up, TV had about what 812 pixels, something like that.
Yep.
Televisions now have over 1,000. That means there is literally 10 times more frames within 1 pixel. There is 10 times the amount of stimulus entering to these children's brains for one television show than we had 20 years ago. And you want to compete. You want to compete Daredevil? You could a 12-year-old could watch Daredevil. That's appropriate for a child to watch. You want to have Daredevil? You want to compete Daredevil to algebra?
Ha. Yeah. No.
Bro. And
No.
then or here's another interesting fact. Fun fact. We know for a fact a child's brain, a human brain, is not at full functioning until minimal 9 o'clock in the morning. What time does school normally start?
Like at 7, 8.
7:30, about 7:30. That means the first hour and a half. That's why children's classes, their first 3 classes are always their worst, because their brains aren't even on.
Oh yeah, that's. I
And
mean,
they're up on
even
caffeine.
absolutely, and even as adults, there was like
We're
a
not
study
ready.
shown that workplaces should actually start realistically to get the most productivity out
10.
of people is exactly at 10. Exactly.
10. 9 is the 9. You're still groggy for the first 30 minutes, but you can function. But these children, for the first 2 hours of the day, they're not there.
Yeah, they're not
And that's
getting it.
assuming, and that's morning people. I'm talking if they're a morning person. They're not a morning person. It's even worse.
Yeah, they
And
go through most of the day not even understanding what the heck just happened.
I remember when I was in geometry, I had a professor named Mr. Davis. He came in, and the first day of class, it was 7:30 in the morning, had a humongous cup of coffee, and he said, "Look, I understand no one here is awake. Nobody wants to be here. I don't want to be here right now. But let's get through this year together, okay? We're going to do our best." But he told us straight up from the day, your brain isn't working. So these children are overstimulated and underslept because people don't understand. Fun fact, if you could change one thing if you took 100% of mental health patients and you changed one thing, half of their illnesses would go away. You want to know what that one thing is?
Sleep.
Yes. But not just sleep, REM sleep.
Yeah, it has to be
REM.
the deep sleep.
Yes, and the sad part, like serotonin, for example. Great. It's a good medication, very commonly used to help. It's used for depression, but what it's usually most time used for is sleep. The problem is when you have sleep induced with medication, it gets you asleep, but it does not trigger REM sleep. It just it shuts your consciousness. And by you, some sleep is better than no sleep.
Yeah, of course.
But so the problem is REM sleep. And now you have a generation of children. Because mind you, when we were kids, we didn't have internet. We didn't. I mean, we couldn't use. There was nothing online. We had Cartoon Network and like GameFAQs in 1998.
Yeah, yeah.
There wasn't a million things. And of course, there was no way to even getting like adult content because there was parental controls. Like it was so easy to stop anything, and you couldn't You couldn't. There was no video games in your room. If you wanted to go play video games, you had to go to the only TV in the house and play. And obviously, your parents would hear you be like, "Hey, go to sleep," and that was the end. And Game Boys, your parents would hide it and put it away. Okay, Game Boy time away. They take it away. So they
Right.
was able to control your accessibility to entertainment. So guess what? You're lying in your bed at 9:30. You're asleep by 10 because there's just nothing to do.
Yeah, yeah.
The problem is nowadays you're talking. They have every child has a cell phone.
Yeah, which blows my mind. That blows my mind.
Blows my mind too. I had students that had cell phones at 5. I remember I was a middle school teacher, and they'd be like, "Why don't I have a cell phone?" I tell them, "How old are you? 14." Like, who do you need to call? Your
Yeah.
mom. That's it.
Yeah,
Like,
I
what if
mean,
something happens? We'll call her for you.
yeah,
You're
and it's
fine.
just, and that's the thing. The parents think that way. They're like, oh wait, the kid needs a phone, because if something
What?
happens, little Johnny has to be able to call mom.
And then they forget. I'm like, okay, we didn't not have cell phones with an education system for literally over 100 years, and we were able to contact parents.
Yeah, and
Literally for 100 years, we never had cell phones. We just called hardline. Hey, we need to contact Billy's dad, and Billy's dad. Oh my gosh, my son's sick. We will contact your parents
yeah,
because
and is that
every adult has it that is responsible for your child. They will be fine.
yeah, and like I think that's like another societal like issue. It's just the new generation is being raised this way, and
They're not sleeping.
it's not a surprise. It
And
shouldn't be, rather.
like if I've heard so many children, if you look at the research, the number of children, teenagers reporting struggles with depression and anxiety are increasing, and their sleep is decreasing.
Yeah, because I mean,
They're not sleeping. They
yeah,
need an adult needs 8 hours. Some people are weirdos that are just born that can sleep 6 to 8, but a child needs 8 to 10. And they're sleeping at 3 o'clock in the morning and getting up in 4 hours. Now, when you're 18, 19, 20 and you're in college, we all did that when we were in college, but we had to work a lot. But you're
yeah,
14, your brain is nowhere near. You are in the very, like, middle school years, 12, 13 tweens. Those are the most, not dangerous, but also a lot of damage can be done in your early years, like the very, very early years, but also the transition to adulthood is very important. Like when you're kind of like once you're in like elementary school, you're kind of like after 3 to like middle school, it's kind of like you're pretty much going to be about the same. But when puberty starts hitting and then you're transitioning into sexual activity and adulthood, that's a very, very, you need your sleep. That's a very important transition in your child because you're transitioning into adulthood and they're not getting the sleep and they're developing anxiety and depression that is beyond outside of normal. The numbers are getting ridiculous. The numbers of reporting now, it could be statistical bias that perhaps people are becoming more cognizant of the issues and are reporting it more often.
yeah.
But
And
we
the
know
thing
this,
is,
that kids are getting depressed and anxious far more than they have before. And they're not getting the sleep that they need because they're texting their 13-year-old boyfriend at 3 a.m.
yeah, and let's be honest, we're 29, so there's a new generation that is adults now. There are new generations that are adults now, and I mean 18 to 19. And
Yeah.
then you wonder why all these things are manifesting themselves now.
And the fun thing is, and you'll see, and there's always going to be the generation, and there's 18, 19 years old who, I've had conversations with them, oh, I agree with you 100%. I don't understand these kids because in my day, and I'm like, well, how did you grow up without a cell phone? Reality is the parents were active in monitoring their lives. Parenting has become very lazy. It really has. It's sad. Parenting has decreased, and I don't have statistical research on that. That is more of my perspective and more of an opinion, but it is an opinion founded on deep knowledge and, well, other research. It's like, okay, well, there's not sleeping, and who's the one letting their kids stay up? If I stayed up at 3 o'clock in the morning when I was 8, my dad would have whooped my butt. Woke
Yeah,
me up to whoop me. I mean, I would have, like, I would have got whooped for sure.
yeah. It's just
These kids, the parents are becoming very bad. It's just the realities.
Yeah, and
And for me, I just
unfortunately it
think I'm like,
shows.
the development of the psychological development of children is being impaired because they're not being allowed to sleep. And there's also that's the biggest factor, but there's also this hypersexuality. For example, people are educating children about sex when they're not cognitively aware. Like, I've heard people trying to argue we need to teach elementary and preschool kids about homosexuality, ace. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. The only developmental, if you're going on a psychological perspective, the only person who's ever identified sexual development was Freud, but it was Freud. I mean, he liked his sex a lot and coke. Fun fact,
Yep.
huge cokehead. But he's brilliant. Don't get me wrong, but cokehead. But he was speaking about it, that there's the oral, which is when you're a child, the anal when you're going through defecation. I can't remember the name of the third one, but it's when you're 5 years old. It's basically when you see the 5-year-old boys. You ever seen like the little 5-year-old boy undressing the doll, or
Yeah.
the girls undressing because they're curious. They understand that they have a sexuality, and they understand that they're curious. The opposite is it. Do they have a penis and balls? What, and if they don't, what do they have? They're curious. It's not even sexual. But the earliest that we have identified, that's been identified by Freud, is 12, 11 to 13, 11 to 12 years old, middle school age, which is about the beginning of puberty, which is a good identification. When puberty starts, that's when this is the youngest that children can start to identify their sexual desires and begin to, experiment with sexual activity.
Now,
If you're going to start educating, it has to be there.
right, and I mean that's kind of when was introduced to that type of class in school, anyways.
Yeah,
But
but there's also another. Oh, mind if I finish that topic
yeah,
and
yeah,
hold the question?
yeah.
There's also another reality. Fun fact: the average age of exposure to pornography now is 7 to 8 years old. It used to be 12 to 13.
Wow.
Because and it's very if you think about it, it's very simple. Let's say I have a 7-year-old daughter, and I'm just on my phone, and let's say I was watching porn a couple hours ago, and I had an app, and I just closed it, obviously, and my daughter wanted to, I don't know, watch a YouTube video, wanted to watch Porky, whatever, something simple, harmless. And let's say she opened up the older one, and there's bam, porn. She got exposed right there.
Yep. Yep.
And it happens very common because it's so accessible. Now, what I'm not talking about for adults. I'm talking about how it affects children. A 7-year-old brain cannot process and truly understand what is happening. And maybe let's say she tries to talk to her father, and the dad's like, "What do you mean? Well, why are you asking about this? Huh?" Well,
Yeah,
a
yeah,
lot of
yeah.
people don't know how to handle it because it's 7. So you having children that are being exposed beyond their development comprehension, it's not as I wouldn't say it's the most prevalent issue, but it is something to be heard of when you're dealing with people that I'm not going to say any specific movements or people who are advocating for we need more education. Well, if you want to educate, do it at the very latest, at the very earliest. I'm sorry, middle school, probably best is entering high school because they've hit puberty and they have at a place where they're ready to they understand that they're a man or whatever they identify with, and that they are attracted to a man or woman or whatever they identify with or whatever their orientation is. They're beginning to understand, and that's when you want to bring that education if you're going to do it.
Right. And that brings me like to the question, like, does this all that we've been talking about, like early childhood development and just how the home affects the child so much, is that, I mean, I would imagine that that definitely has an impact of mental health today. I mean,
Absolutely.
like I said, I mean, we're now 29, so it makes a lot of sense that we're now seeing those kids who are now 18, 19, it just manifests themselves, it's just
Well,
starting to manifest themselves.
the reality is we are old enough to have kids that would be going to middle school.
Right.
Because let's pretend we had kids at 18, they'd be 11. They'd be getting ready to go to middle school. We're old enough to be those parents. And that's assuming, thank goodness you and me didn't have kids that young. We would have screwed that kid up for completely.
Yeah, I agree.
But I jest.
Oh no,
But the
I
reality,
completely agree. I'm not
oh
ready.
no, I'm not ready now either. Shoot, I just got I'm enjoying my license and having fun.
Yeah.
But we're in that phase of because in by Erickson we are in the young adulthood phase, which is intimacy versus isolation. So we're looking for intimate relationships. It doesn't have to be sexual. It's just relationships that we feel we are intimate, that we could be 100% ourselves outside of just family. It can be deep friendships, but it's usually romantic. And if we don't develop them, we become isolated. And even in our generation, millennials, they did a recent study in, I think, the state of California. They did like a survey of about 10,000 people. 30% of millennials that took the survey identified as having zero friends.
That's dangerous. And that's,
The,
I
you know
mean,
what the number was for baby boomers?
mm.
15. The highest before was 20.
And we
The
can
number
see that impact of of how much you know, in their generation they didn't have a choice. You had to go out there and you had to interact with people.
now, no, you can play Fortnite for 10 hours,
Yeah, with your
which is,
buddies who might be next door. You know?
or even like, or for example, we're for streamers. Obviously, if you have not been aware, me and Carlos are gigantic nerds, and we've grown up. We've known each other for 15 years. We know each other more than half our lives.
Yep.
If I remember, and Carlos can attest, I remember having Halo 1 back in the day. We had to carry this huge fatback TV, put it on a table, connect it. We have to go to Best buy extra long router cables, connect it into the back to connect to the Xbox to get on Xbox One, and he would have to sit right next to me, and we would be there playing Halo 1 online, which was, in our minds, oh my gosh, we could play with our buddy Brian over that's like on the like 10 minutes away in Miami. That like blew our freaking minds.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Either way, we had to be physically in the room
Yeah.
to even be able to accomplish this.
Yeah, and it was a whole thing. Or before that was well, I remember we used to have N64 parties. I would go to a buddy's house and we would play Smash Brothers, and then be like, okay, go invite your friends, and we all take turns. And Mario Party and Smash Brothers. We had Mario Party and Smash Party parties
Yeah,
where you would
and
just come in and people would order pizza, or we would go to McDonald's and we would come by and bring the McDonald's. And remember Halo nights? We used to do Halo nights as a kid. Every week we
exactly.
would meet at Jihad and Marina and Jihad's house and have Halo nights
And that
every
would be
Sunday.
7 people in the room.
Yep, I've been to many of them, and of course, well, you guys play way more Halo than I did, but it seems like people and the older generation, but that's how we bonded. We were in the room, we were together, and while the people, because there's 7 people in the room, only 4 people play. The other 3 are talking. Hey, how's work? Oh my gosh, did you see that thing on the news? Yo, did you watch that show? Well, it probably was like Teen Titans or something,
Yeah,
because I was
yeah.
like, or Avatar: Last Airbender, because that was big when we were in high school. Or actually Bones or something like that. Like we would talk. The other 3 people would talk. You know, a couple girls would be there. They wouldn't be playing, and then the one dude not playing is trying to hook up with the other 2 girls because we're teenagers. You know, it's what you do.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're laughing, and then the other 4, like there was, but it seems that the tool that was used to cause us to connect has caused further disconnection.
Right. And it's funny because it's marketed as a way to connect.
I swear I joke about this, but I swear Wally, if this keeps up, will become America.
Oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
So let's wrap this up as what we can do. Now, the reality is as a human, as an individual, we are only responsible for our individual actions. So we have to live lives knowing, because we talked a lot of topics. For example, knowing how mental health is affected by sleep, knowing that we need to have healthy lifestyles, knowing that we need understanding and educating about, hey, by the way, it's mostly genetic. Hey, by the way, nature versus nurture is kind of BS. It's mostly just nature.
Right.
It really is mostly nature and how you're raised by the immediate family. Educating the importance of human connection. If you want to walk away with something, walk away with this. The importance of human connection. Just having a connection. Even like this, Carl's one of my best friends. I've known this kid for 15 years. How many people can say that they have 15 years worth of friendship?
Poof.
Just
very little. Very, 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 very little.
And Carlos, you're not even the longest I know. Axel, I've known for 17 years.
Yep.
Axel's my longest known friend. And I'm going to go watch Vampires Live with him next weekend.
Yep.
I still don't know who they are, but whatever. They're probably...
Yeah. But I get you, dude. I get you.
So the importance and value of human connection. Just spending time. Now, there's some people who can have full-on connection through through texting. I have a friend, we only text, but we feel completely connected through texting. And there's other people, because even in dating, people are like, well, why can't you connect with someone through texting? To expect that everyone communicate the same is arrogant. That's like saying, why doesn't everyone in the world speak English? Because
Right.
there's hundreds of languages. So what you have to learn is learn as many different communication styles, whether it's through texting or Facebook communicating, going up to meet coffee. There's people like, for example, my friend Arlene. We had this discussion. She cannot connect with anyone unless it's face to face. So we have to meet halfway. And last weekend, we met halfway and we met at a restaurant, whatever, had a nice time. But people do not prioritize human connection. We need to prioritize human connection. And in that connection, bring education. Because if not, then you just sound like an a-hole going around like, you just sound like an a-hole panning out pamphlets like, do more about mental health. Like, oh, okay, thanks. And what do people do? They throw it away.
Right.
Nobody will listen to you if you don't listen to them. Give opportunity to build relationship. And in that relationship, that's where you can build education. Because if you educate one person, you educate a million.
Yep.
Because the reality is that there was an old game called The World Ends With You. And the whole point of that game at the end is that with each person is a world. And when you influence a person, you influence a world. Because in that person, that you are influencing the people they connect. Build relationships, and you don't need a lot. I'm not saying make 1,000 friends. I'm saying, are you one of the 30% that have 0 friends? Make one good one. Build a relationship there, and eventually you'll make another one. That person will introduce you to someone else, or the two of you will meet someone else. And in those small connections, get a few solid people. You don't need much. People, I don't have a lot of friends. Do you have 5 solid friends that you've known for a few years? No. Do you have 5 solid friends? Yeah. Get to know them for a few years. Build it for like 5 years.
Yep.
So psychologists say, other psychologists research have said that if you have a friendship that lasts more than 7 years, it will last the rest of your life. So according to research, you and me are stuck to each other till one of us dies.
Dang it.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, Christine.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Build those core relationships. And in those relationships, ask these questions. Challenge each other. Because once again, without resistance, there is no growth. And it is almost impossible to find 0 resistance in relationships. Find people that build you up and challenge you.
Yep.
And force you to grow. And surround yourself with those people. And in that place, find education on what you're passionate about. And then you will start to change your outward environment. Slowly, but consistently. Slowly it will occur, but it will happen consistently. And you will impact your workplace, your place of your family relationships. Even when you just go out to hang out, you will make an impact. But on that note, I do got to go, Carlos. It was good talking to you, man.
Yeah, man, for sure. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Thank you guys for listening. Have a good night.
All right. Thank you, man. See ya.
Bye.
Bye. Wow, powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. And I absolutely agree. I mean, that's just the reality of it. The lack of human connection is an issue. And I guess just through the world we live in, it just gets worse. Anyway, guys, unfortunately, that is all the time I have today. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Mike, for stopping by and being a part of the conversation. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/ADifficultTruth. You can also like us on Facebook at facebook.com/ADifficultTruthOfficial. And you can listen to this podcast on soundcloud.com/ADifficultTruth. I'll leave all the links in the description below. Check the channel, and I hope to see you guys in the next stream. See ya!
struggle, the fight with one another, complacent with the fact that our systems are broken, with the fact that the top 10 will always be first in line, the fact that we are killing our planet and allowing them to keep us divided. We must stand together and rise up. It's time we wake up, and that is a difficult truth.